Just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top story. The post-Emir of Kano, Muhammadu Sanusi, explained why he declined to challenge his dethronement in court. Says letter by the Kano state government sacking him contained loopholes. Governor of Imo State, Hope Uzodinma, vows that group in the ruling APC will mobilize to frustrate any plan to remove the party's national chairman, Adams Oshomole, from office. The Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission shuts down Chinese eatery in Victoria Island, Lagos, for refusing to serve Nigerians in the restaurant. And as the dreaded coronavirus spreads like wildfire across the world, Spain declares national emergency and locks down the entire country to fight the disease, as France closes non-essential public places. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. And staying with education, it appears that university lecturers are not the only ones kicking against the implementation of the new Integrated Personnel Payroll Information System, IPIS, in the academic circle. Lecturers in the nation's colleges of education, under the aegis of the Colleges of Academic Staff Union, also seem to have an axe to grind with the system. In a statement by the president of the union, the lecturers accused the federal government of breaching the agreement it had with their union about capturing the peculiarities of the sector into the new payroll system. It says members of the union received their February salaries without those peculiarities, which include some earned allowances of lecturers as well as payments for colleges for colleagues who are on sabbatical. Now, ASU proceeded on a 2-week warning strike last week to kick against the enforcement of IPIS by the federal government, amongst other grievances. As part of measures to aid quick dispensation of justice, the courts must regularly award costs against lawyers for delay of cases as a punitive measure. This is the view of a senior advocate of Nigeria. In an interview with our judicial correspondent, Shola Shoyele, the senior advocate says the Constitution can also be amended to limit the number of cases that goes all the way to the Supreme Court.
I think that the appellate courts are trying within the limitations, which is that they have dockets, full dockets. And the reality is that a lot of these cases are frivolous. And so if there were to be any constitutional amendments, it would be in terms of limiting what should go to the Supreme Court, so that the Court of Appeal for certain cases becomes the final court. I think that's one of the ways of trimming down the workload for the Supreme Court. It's all about ensuring that when your matter is set down for hearing, you are ready to go on, because it's not unusual, and while I don't have statistics, a reasonable amount of time you go to court, a matter is set for hearing, a lawyer pops up and says, oh, I just filed something now. So there must be a cost associated with the inability for the matter to proceed that day. And perhaps when costs are awarded on a more regular and punitive basis, then we will all sit up, because the justice suffers, the client suffers, and at the end of the day, justice denied is no justice delayed is no justice.
The agitations for the development and establishment of development commissions across the geopolitical zones of the country has been received with mixed reactions. In the last 2 weeks, the National Assembly has passed through second reading development commission bills for the Southwest, the Southeast, South-South, Northwest, and the North Central. In this special report, our correspondent, Terry Kumi, takes a look at the positives and negatives associated with the establishment of regional development commissions.
20 years ago, when the Niger Delta Development Commission was created, with the sole mandate of developing the oil-rich Niger Delta region, following agitations, it was well received because of the contribution of the region to the economy of the country. The agitations were born out of the need for the states that make up the Niger Delta region to enjoy the benefit of producing oil, which is the major source of revenue for the country. In 2017, following the devastation in the northeast caused by insurgency, a development commission was established for the region, aimed at resettlement, rehabilitation and reconstruction of infrastructure. Since then, there have been agitations from other regions for the establishment of their own development commissions. As it stands in the National Assembly, there is a bill for every region currently being considered.
If we have commission for parts of Nigeria that deserves it and made a case for it, I believe that's the only way the whole country will be developed. What I will suggest, Mr. President, in order not to divide this chamber, is for every geopolitical zone to come up with their own development agenda.
Yes. Interestingly, some lawmakers want a well-defined line between agitation for inclusiveness and political agitation.
Northeast was devastated by Boko Haram and all the wars, and they need rehabilitation. The same thing with Niger Delta. Because of the oil exploration activities, the livelihood of the people there was almost rendered useless, and they could not farm, they could not fish, but they need all these activities. So the Niger Delta Commission was created. I cannot see a reason why Southwest Commission should be Development Commission should be created, because Southwest is the most developed sub-region of this country.
In the Senate, we passed two bills: the Northeast Development Bill and the Southeast Development Bill. The President, in his wisdom, because he loved the unity of this country, did not sign one because he does not want balkanization.
The establishment of regional development commissions also seems to take away the responsibilities of state governments to develop their states. Take the Niger Delta, for example. The region has a Niger Delta Ministry. The Niger Delta Development Commission and a South-South Development Commission bill is currently before the National Assembly.
The difference is that we have not gotten what we're supposed to get from NDDC. And so you see the last forensic that Dr. Joy did. It was awesome. You see that people have been collecting billions, and they're not doing anything.
With the House of Representatives pushing a bill to ensure that at least 40% of the country's annual budget is allocated to capital projects, the establishment of these regional commissions will most likely increase the recurrent expenditure of the federal government. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Joining us live from our studios in Kano to discuss this is a senior lecturer in political science at the Bayero University, Kano, Professor Saidu Dukawa. A pleasure having you with us on the news at 10.
It's a pleasure.
Now, the idea of a development commission is to fast-track development across geopolitical zones. Would you say this objective has been achieved in the country?
Well, your listeners have been told why the Niger Delta Development Commission was formed. So also why the Northeast Development Commission was formed due to the crisis situations in those regions. But when one looks at the pace of development, one can hardly be satisfied with these commissions. The justification for extending such commissions to all geopolitical zones is not really quite clear. All the issue that is talked about is development. But in the first place, why the need for that? Is it a consensus of the people? If so, how was it arrived at? Or is it a development, a consensus of the ruling elite? And if so, how rational is it? How justifiable? And there are even more questions really to answer if one is to understand all these calls for development commissions, this development commission, that.
Yes, indeed,
see,
Prophet.
If each... Come on?
Yes, indeed, Prof. You were saying there are a lot of questions because it's also argued that the clamor for development commissions by zones is as a result of the failure of the federal government to adequately address the issue of development. So do you agree with this?
No, not at all. I see it merely as a competition of the ruling elite to have more access to state resources, or perhaps as an agenda to achieve a restructuring of a kind, which has been pushed for a long time without success. For if you have development commissions in each geopolitical zone, some of the questions that will arise include how they can get their funding. You see, when listening to Senator, the senator from Southwest when pushing the bill, he was talking about getting funds from the federal government and managing them, at the same time talking about mobilizing resources within the region to develop the area. And these are conflictual. If you talk about getting funds from the federal government, it's like you are talking about federalism. When you are talking about mobilizing resources in the region, you are talking about confederalism because you are talking about resource control. And this is conflictual. Also, questions such as when they are instituted, how do they relate with the center? And how do they relate with each other? How do they relate with the outside world? And in case of conflicts among them, who settles them? In an attempt to answer all these questions, you will see that it's either you will talk about more involvement of federal government in coordinating them, in which case you are back to square one. Or you may talk of more autonomy to each region regarding its own pace of development, in which case you are pushing the country to confederalism. And that's why some of the distinguished senators argued that this is an exercise directed towards balkanizing the country. And I think they are more right than wrong.
Now, briefly now, Prof, quickly tell us, do you think it's better to strengthen those ministries, departments and agencies financially and administratively to enable them function better? That's going forward now.
An array of institutions does not help in any way. For instance, they are talking about more development of agriculture. Then what will the Federal Ministry of Agriculture be doing and other state ministries of agriculture? They are talking of industry. What about other ministries of industry and both at state and local government levels? And see the array of institutions in the Niger Delta, and still the hues and cries in that region are there. By the time you have additional institution, you are only creating role conflicts, and unless they are talking about having more opportunities to access national resources so that they share among themselves. But as far as development issue is concerned, it's not a problem of institutions. It's a problem of the character and attitude of the ruling elites. They have failed to deliver good governance, and they are pushing the blame elsewhere.
Professor Saidu Dukawa, it was a pleasure sharing your thoughts with us on the News at 10.
It's also my pleasure.
When the News at 10 returns, the Securities and Exchange Commission braces for commodities market development as it hosts roundtable on agri-produce and solid minerals trading next week. That's on Business News. Join us again.